mirrors Stoic exercises in judgment, the discernment of what lies within one's control and the acceptance of what does not. Energy, when consciously preserved and allocated, becomes a tool for deliberate action rather than a resource expended unconsciously. The role of internal perception is paramount. The mind interprets every encounter, shaping its significance and impact. When energy is surrendered automatically, perception aligns with exhaustion, creating a self-reinforcing cycle. By bringing awareness to these unconscious habits, the cycle is interrupted. The individual learns to recognize the difference between legitimate engagement and reflexive expenditure of effort. Decisions are informed by observation, reflection, and the deliberate assessment of consequences. Energy is no longer a passive resource at the mercy of circumstance, but an active instrument of intention. This internal vigilance cultivates resilience, steadiness, and clarity, allowing for participation in life without being diminished by habitual surrender. Finally, energy stewardship becomes a form of self-respect and ethical practice. Each moment of recognition, each decision to reclaim what was previously surrendered, strengthens autonomy and reinforces boundaries. It is not selfishness to protect one's own presence. It is a fundamental requirement for integrity, for clarity of action, and for the capacity to engage authentically. The patterns of internal leakage are illuminated through disciplined attention and thoughtful reflection, providing the opportunity to act deliberately rather than reactively. In this process, freedom is regained, presence is restored, and the mind is fortified. As Marcus Aurelius observed, control over the self is the only true power, and by stewarding energy wisely, one exercises that power with deliberate intention. Recognition of internal drains completes the foundation for deliberate engagement. By acknowledging that exhaustion and depletion often originate from habitual choices rather than external impositions, the individual gains agency over interactions, commitments, and daily actions. Conscious stewardship transforms previously invisible losses into deliberate allocation, ensuring that energy is preserved, presence is sustained, and life is lived with intention. Each interaction, each decision, and each pause becomes an opportunity to reinforce boundaries, protect clarity, and exercise judgment. In this way, internal awareness becomes both the shield and the compass for navigating the complexities of life, preserving vitality and cultivating freedom, presence, and intentional living. Boundaries are often misunderstood. They are not walls built to isolate or punish. They are lines drawn in service of clarity, in service of presence. Each time attention is given, each moment spent, each ounce of effort extended, it communicates to both ourselves and others what is available, what is possible, and what is meaningful. When boundaries are absent, energy is diffused indiscriminately, scattered across countless demands, obligations, and expectations. The mind becomes restless, the body fatigued, and presence is diminished. Life proceeds as a series of reactions rather than deliberate actions, and every moment of giving without awareness carries a hidden cost. To recognize where one ends and others begin is to reclaim autonomy, to assert ownership over the finite currency of attention and presence. It is to move through the world not as a conduit for others' needs, but as a steward of what one can genuinely offer. Discipline in this context is not punitive, it is liberating. The Stoics recognized that true freedom arises not from the absence of constraint, but from mastery over the self. By defining limits and honoring them, one establishes the conditions under which energy can be invested meaningfully. Saying no is not an act of cruelty or detachment, it is an act of wisdom. Each refusal clarifies the contours of availability, signaling to others the scope of engagement that can be met with full attention and integrity. The paradox of presence is that by reserving energy, one becomes more fully present where it is allocated. Scattered attention produces diluted engagement. Conscious allocation produces depth. To invest selectively is not selfishness. It is a recognition that attention and effort are finite resources and must be directed with deliberation. The tension between desire to please and need for preservation is subtle but powerful. Many of the drains on energy arise from the compulsion to respond affirmatively, to accommodate requests, to fulfill expectations that are not aligned with one's priorities. In doing so, energy is expended preemptively, leaving less available for what truly matters. Reflection and awareness illuminate this dynamic. Each moment of compromise or overextension teaches a lesson about capacity, priority, and self-respect. The clarity provided by boundaries allows one to approach interactions and obligations with intention rather than reflexive compliance. When energy is managed consciously, every engagement becomes an opportunity for meaningful presence rather than depletion. The disciplined mind recognizes that presence is valuable and that each moment of attention carries weight that should not be squandered. Consider the implications for relationships. When boundaries are undefined, interactions can become cycles of misalignment and fatigue. Others may unknowingly impose upon attention, assuming availability or consent where none was deliberately granted. This dynamic is not a moral failing on their part, but a reflection of the absence of clarity. Conversely, defined boundaries communicate intent, availability, and expectation, allowing interactions to proceed with mutual understanding. The presence given under these conditions is fuller, richer, and more effective. Energy is not dispersed across irrelevant channels, but concentrated where it can generate growth, connection, and impact. The clarity that arises from boundaries cultivates respect, understanding, and authenticity in both the self and others. Energy is inseparable from judgment and discernment. The ability to observe where attention is invested and to make conscious choices about what is permitted to consume it is a practice of self-governance. Decisions regarding engagement are not arbitrary. They are informed by awareness of capacity, priorities, and purpose. Aristotle noted that virtue involves moderation and deliberate choice, and the management of energy mirrors this principle. The disciplined allocation of presence allows one to maintain alignment with values, to act in accordance with purpose, and to avoid unnecessary depletion. Each engagement becomes intentional, each refusal considered, each investment of energy deliberate. Presence is not reactive but directed, not scattered but coherent. The subtle power of boundaries extends beyond interpersonal relationships to every dimension of life. Work, projects, creative endeavors, and commitments all compete for attention, and without clarity, energy is fragmented. Prioritization becomes meaningless if attention is extended indiscriminately. The clarity provided by boundaries enables focus, concentration, and depth, allowing effort to generate meaningful outcomes rather than dissipating in unfocused exertion. Discipline in defining where energy is directed is thus both practical and philosophical. It aligns daily action with long-term values, ensuring that the expenditure of attention serves purpose rather than obligation. Presence, invested consciously, compounds its impact. Psychologically, boundaries create safety within which growth can occur. When limits are established and honored, the mind is free to engage fully without fear of overextension or distraction. Emotional and mental reserves are preserved, allowing creativity, insight, and resilience to emerge naturally. The absence of boundaries produces subtle anxiety, the sense that one is always behind, always stretched, and never fully present. By contrast, deliberate boundaries provide a framework within which energy is replenished and applied effectively. The individual becomes a source of intentional presence rather than a passive participant in the demands of circumstance. Reflection before commitment is not avoidance, it is stewardship. Each interaction with another person is a potential exchange of energy, attention, and influence, and the decision to participate should not be made lightly. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself to meet people as they are, not as he wished them to be. The principle applies beyond interpersonal encounters. It extends to every obligation, every request, and every moment demanding response. The recognition that one cannot fully control the actions or expectations of others shifts the focus to what is within control. The choice to respond with awareness, the allocation of presence, and the determination of boundaries. By embracing this perspective, engagement becomes intentional rather than reactive, preserving mental clarity and emotional equilibrium while still honoring obligations and relationships. Energy preservation through deliberate choice fosters resilience. When attention and effort are extended only where they are meaningful, the mind maintains focus and the spirit retains capacity for engagement. Without reflection, interactions tend to consume energy indiscriminately. Tasks accumulate, obligations overlap, and the subtle erosion of attention becomes normalized. The disciplined act of pausing, evaluating, and responding allows the individual to maintain alignment between action and values, avoiding the slow depletion that accompanies reactive participation. The pause itself is a signal of sovereignty over one's time and presence, a conscious reclamation of what is often surrendered automatically. It transforms each decision from a simple reaction into an act of agency, reinforcing the integrity of choice and reinforcing boundaries that protect clarity and energy. Weekly audits and reflective practices amplify this capacity. By examining what nourishes the mind and spirit and what drains them, patterns emerge that illuminate where energy is being expended wisely and where it is being wasted. Journaling, meditation, or simply quiet contemplation provide insight into the cumulative effects of commitments and interactions. When the mind is aware of these patterns, it can adjust engagement accordingly, selectively investing attention where it is restorative and meaningful, and withholding presence where it is depleting or misaligned. The habitual reflection cultivates foresight, enabling the individual to anticipate interactions that may impose unnecessary demands and to structure time and attention with precision. This practice transforms ordinary experience into an intentional exercise in energy stewardship. Boundaries, when enacted with clarity, are not acts of rejection but instruments of integrity. They communicate limits, expectations, and intention. Saying no, declining a request, or delaying response is not coldness. It is an assertion of alignment between action and purpose. By preserving energy, the individual enhances the capacity to participate fully and effectively in engagements that are significant. The discipline to reflect before committing establishes a standard for interaction, signaling that presence is valuable and finite, and that its distribution should be deliberate. This approach cultivates respect both inward and outward, creating conditions in which exchanges of attention and effort are balanced, reciprocal, and meaningful. The compassionate dimension of boundaries emerges from their role in sustaining presence rather than enforcing separation. When energy is managed consciously, interactions are approached with full awareness rather than distraction or fatigue. Engagement is deliberate, and the individual retains the capacity to listen, respond thoughtfully, and act with purpose. The clarity achieved through reflective practices does not reduce empathy or connection, it enhances it. One becomes fully present where attention is directed, capable of meaningful contribution, and able to navigate the complexities of interpersonal dynamics without losing stability or composure. The practice of pausing and reflecting ensures that presence is sustained and that energy is neither dissipated carelessly nor hoarded unnecessarily. Sovereignty over one's energy strengthens resilience against external pressures. The habitual tendency to comply automatically to meet expectations without assessment gradually diminishes the ability to act with intention. By integrating the pause, reflection, and deliberate choice into daily practice, the individual cultivates a buffer against reactive depletion, creating a sustainable pattern of engagement. Energy becomes a managed resource, attentively invested rather than inadvertently surrendered. This deliberate approach fosters confidence, clarity, and the ability to navigate demands and obligations without compromising inner stability. The mind and spirit retain capacity for creativity, insight, and meaningful action, while interactions and commitments align with values and priorities. The mind can be both a sanctuary and a battlefield. While external demands often draw attention and presence, the most insidious drains are those that arise from within. Anxiety about how others perceive us, the subtle compulsion to measure ourselves against imagined standards, and the constant pull of comparison all sap energy silently. They consume attention before any external interaction occurs, leaving the spirit fatigued even when the body has rested. Internal pressure is often less visible, yet more potent, because it disguises itself as thought, responsibility, or care. It masquerades as necessity while eroding focus, clarity, and motivation, leaving an ongoing residue that shapes perception and dictates responses. This quiet depletion is pervasive, infiltrating moments of decision, reflection, and creativity, and often goes unnoticed until the cumulative effect is unmistakable. Deliberate restorative practices are essential for resetting the internal landscape. Meditation anchors the mind, providing a space to observe without becoming entangled, to notice thought patterns without reacting reflexively. Journaling externalizes internal dialogue, allowing reflection and insight to clarify priorities and realign energy with purpose. Moments of stillness or immersion in nature provide a reset that reconnects mind, body, and environment, diminishing the weight of imagined obligations and diffuse concerns. These practices are not indulgences. They are essential instruments for energy management, allowing the mind to recover and return to action with presence and focus intact. The deliberate cultivation of calm and clarity within allows for engagement that is responsive rather than reactive. Internal pressures often manifest as subtle obligations: the anxiety of imagined expectations, the compulsion to perform for approval, or the anticipation of judgment. These forces are self-generated, yet they operate with the same intensity as external demands. By recognizing the source of these drains as internal, one gains agency. Energy previously lost to speculation, fear, and imagined scenarios can be reclaimed, preserved, and allocated intentionally. Reflection, the deliberate pause and conscious assessment of internal pressures, empower the individual to act in alignment with values rather than react to perceived obligation. It is the difference between living under compulsion and living with deliberate choice, between surrendering presence to imagined demands and directing attention to what truly matters. Comparison is a particularly corrosive internal drain. The mind constantly evaluates achievements, appearance, and attention relative to others, generating subtle dissatisfaction and anxiety. This comparison functions as a silent tax on energy, diverting focus from meaningful work and reflection. Stoic philosophy teaches that what is beyond one's control, others' thoughts, achievements, and judgments, should not dictate internal equilibrium. Attention given to external measures of value rather than the cultivation of virtue and mastery over self is energy expended on illusions. The discipline to disengage from comparison and to anchor value in deliberate action and integrity conserves vitality and fosters clarity. This internal recalibration allows engagement with life on one's own terms rather than in reaction to others' performance or perception. Intentional engagement with life emerges from these internal practices. By monitoring thought, identifying unnecessary drains, and applying restorative practices, energy is preserved and allocated strategically. Journaling, meditation, reflection, and stillness are not isolated acts. They are integrated into daily life as mechanisms for sustaining clarity and focus. When energy is deliberately managed, the mind operates from a foundation of presence rather than depletion. Actions are aligned with values, decisions are informed rather than reactive, and interactions are approached with full attention. The individual is empowered to respond rather than be swept away by internal or external pressures, cultivating resilience, calm, and meaningful engagement. Ultimately, internal energy management is inseparable from intentional living. Awareness of the subtle drains created by anxiety, fear, and imagined obligations provides the opportunity to reclaim presence and allocate attention deliberately. Energy preservation is not withdrawal or avoidance, but the foundation for authentic participation in life. By observing, reflecting, and practicing restorative methods, the mind and body regain capacity for focused action, creativity, and meaningful interaction. As Aristotle observed, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. The habit of cultivating internal clarity ensures that each moment is engaged fully, that energy is preserved, and that life is navigated with deliberation, presence, and integrity. Internal mastery transforms energy from a passive resource into an instrument of intentional living, sustaining focus, resilience, and freedom across every dimension of experience. The final measure of energy protection lies not in isolation, but in deliberate integration. It is not a retreat from life, but a conscious engagement with it, a measured presence that ensures each interaction, task, and moment receives attention where it is warranted and is withheld where it is not. To protect energy is not to avoid responsibility or opportunity, but to allocate attention with intention, to invest presence in alignment with purpose rather than reflexively responding to expectation. Each decision becomes an exercise in discernment, the choice to speak or remain silent, to act or defer, to extend attention or conserve it. This is the practice of self-mastery, the cultivation of presence as a resource that is both finite and sacred. Living by one's own measure requires honest assessment of priorities and values. When energy is spent indiscriminately, the mind is fragmented, focus is diluted, and the capacity for deliberate action diminishes. The demands of others, whether explicit or implied, exert a gravitational pull on attention, and without awareness, they can dominate experience. Reflection, however, provides the lens through which allocation becomes conscious. By observing where energy is being expended and considering whether it aligns with purpose, the individual gains the capacity to choose engagement rather than be swept into obligation. It is a discipline of observation, evaluation, and deliberate action that transforms interactions from sources of depletion into opportunities for meaningful contribution. Integration also requires recognition that energy is cumulative. Every moment of unnecessary expenditure, every encounter in which presence is given without thought, compounds to produce fatigue, distraction, and diminished clarity. The habitual sacrifice of energy to external pressures or imagined obligations sets a baseline of exhaustion that undermines both judgment and well-being. By becoming aware of these patterns, energy can be reclaimed. Moments previously surrendered reflexively are now allocated with intention. Decisions about presence, attention, and action are informed by awareness of both capacity and consequence. Each act of deliberate engagement reinforces autonomy, preserves clarity, and cultivates resilience, allowing the mind and body to operate from a foundation of strength rather than depletion. The discernment of what deserves attention and what does not is central to this practice. Obligations, interactions, and relationships vary in their energy demands and their impact. Some situations require full presence, focus, and deliberate action. Others do not. By evaluating the potential return on energy investment, one ensures that attention is concentrated where it will yield meaningful outcomes, rather than diffused across irrelevant or unproductive demands. This discernment is neither avoidance nor indifference. It is wisdom in the allocation of presence. The mind and spirit are preserved through intentional engagement, and clarity emerges from the consistent practice of mindful distribution. Internal reflection amplifies this process. By examining the sources of depletion, the habits that unconsciously consume attention, and the patterns of interaction that either restore or drain energy, the individual cultivates insight. This insight informs decisions about engagement, enabling proactive rather than reactive presence. Meditation, journaling, and contemplative reflection provide tools for observing these patterns and recalibrating allocation accordingly. When attention is directed consciously, the energy spent aligns with purpose, priorities, and values, transforming everyday experience into deliberate practice. The internal landscape becomes a map for external action, guiding choice, presence, and contribution. Integration also requires recognition of limits. Energy is finite, and attempts to exceed capacity result in diminished effectiveness, increased fatigue, and impaired judgment. The discipline of self-awareness allows for the identification of natural boundaries, ensuring that presence is neither overextended nor misapplied. The conscious acknowledgement of limits is not weakness. It is a recognition of the finite nature of attention and the necessity of conserving it for meaningful engagement. Each pause, each refusal, and each decision to withhold presence is an act of preservation, reinforcing the capacity for deliberate, impactful action. The practice of deliberate energy allocation cultivates autonomy and freedom. By reclaiming moments that were previously surrendered unconsciously, the individual strengthens control over experience. Life is no longer dictated by external expectation or habitual reflex. It is directed by conscious choice. Each engagement becomes purposeful, each decision aligned with values, and each boundary an affirmation of self-sovereignty. In this way, energy protection transcends practical necessity and becomes an expression of philosophy, a lived application of Stoic principles in which the self is both steward and beneficiary of attention, presence, and deliberate action. Ultimately, the mastery of one's energy is inseparable from mastery over self. It is the recognition that freedom is not found in the absence of obligation, but in the deliberate exercise of judgment regarding engagement, attention, and presence. Energy is neither limitless nor inexhaustible, and each moment that is reclaimed, each boundary that is respected, and each decision to invest attention consciously reinforces autonomy, resilience, and clarity. Epictetus observed that no man is free who is not master of himself. By directing energy with intention, by choosing engagement wisely, and by cultivating discernment in every interaction, the individual transforms experience from a series of obligations into a canvas of deliberate, meaningful action, preserving presence, protecting clarity, and sustaining the capacity to live fully, freely, and intentionally. Take a deep breath and let this sink in. Your energy is yours to steward, your presence is yours to command, and your clarity is yours to protect. Every moment you reclaim, every boundary you honor, every choice you make with intention strengthens the life you are capable of living. You do not owe anyone your exhaustion, your scattered attention, or your unrest. What you do owe yourself is presence, purpose, and the freedom to act aligned with your values. Carry that awareness with you and let it guide every interaction, every commitment, every decision. And as you continue on this path, explore the video on your screen. It dives deeper into how discipline, reflection, and daily practices can transform your mind and your life from reactive to intentional. Thank you for being part of Stoic Journal. Your presence here matters, and your journey toward clarity, resilience, and deliberate living is one we are honored to share.